Hello. Today we're going to write our first poem together. We're going to write 15 different sentences, and we're going to do something special for each sentence. And then when that's done, without even knowing it, you'll have put together a poem. And this poem will have some power to it because it will have visual imagery, it will sound interesting and rhythmical, and it will also have some visual imagery that evokes some emotion, which is what sometimes a poem is supposed to do. So it's supposed to be a powerful, condensed, meaningful literary creation. And you do it intentionally, one line at a time. Some poets just sit down and write, but most people have a plan. And this is one of those poems that really is like a recipe. It's a procedural poem. So I'm going to walk you through it, and I'm going to show you how I did it. So the first thing you want to do is choose a person you know about whom you have very strong feelings for, either positive or negative. That person can be alive, that person could have passed away, or it can simply be a pet, because, in our lives, pets are people too. And it should be someone you know something about, someone you can remember, someone you can see in your mind's eye and hear in your ear. And so you're going to put that person's name as the title, and then you do not have to do what I said here, and that is put in an emotion or a color that you associated. You don't have to do that. But then you have to write 15 different sentences, and I'm going to walk you through that. So as your first lead sentence, you're going to do one of the followings, and so you don't have to number your sentences, just write one line at a time. And the first one's going to start with any of these 6 different beginnings. I often start with "you stand there" when I do this, but you could say "no one is here, like but me," or "in this memory of you, you are," or "I think sometimes about you when," or "your face is," or "we had been doing such and such a thing." And that's a good way to start because it leads the reader into an activity and kind of shows us the setting for where this person is. The second sentence, you use a color. The third sentence, you talk about a facial expression. The fourth one, you use a simile. The fifth one is a long one. It's a 25-word sentence, exactly 25 words. The next one is a sentence with less than 8 words. It could even have 1. Number 7 is a sentence that names a piece of clothing. Number 8 names a wish that you would like to tell this person. Number 9 has an animal in it. Number 10 uses 3 or more alliterative words. The 11th sentence is a sentence that has 2 commas in it. The 12th sentence has a smell and a color. The 13th sentence has a simile in it again. The 14th sentence has an exclamatory sentence ending with an exclamation point. And then the last sentence is basically you use the title word again in a sentence somewhere. I should say word, not work. So I'm going to show you how I did that. So you can just bear with me. I'll show you. And that is, I have an example poem. And this example is also available for you in all its glorious 2 colors on our classroom. So the first line, 1, it says to use one of those beginnings, and I used "you stand there." And I wrote, "You stand there at the workbench, always fixing or building something," because I'm talking about my father, the maker of things. And then when I close my eyes, I often picture him fixing something or using tools. I can see him standing there. Line number 2, I'm going to use a color, but I don't need to use an actual color. I can just say you're the color of something or some kind of color. So your hands are the color of rust and iron. That's kind of a reddish orange, but I didn't say that. I just said color of rust and iron. Line number 3, the sentence number 3, is a facial expression. So any facial expression will do: a smile, a wink, a wrinkled brow, really anything. I simply talked about how he was focused with his eyes on the task at hand. Your gaze is focused on the task at hand. Line number 4 is a simile, and a simile is a comparison that uses like or as. So in this case, I think about my father using a hammer, and I compare him to the Roman god Vulcan or the Norse god Thor. And I said, as you pound the metal with the hammer, you are like Vulcan, like Thor. Number 5 is a really long sentence, exactly 25 words. We do a long sentence because this is the sentence that's the heart of the poem. Don't worry about what you want to say. Just make an observation or recall a memory about the person. I recalled how often I stood there in the workshop watching him do his thing, and I commented about how I watched him transform into someone else while he was working. He was always so serious and focused. Normally, my dad is a happy-go-lucky guy, but when he worked, he was serious. So I wrote, no one else saw the transformation of man into God but me as you thundered and ordered the metal to move into the shape you asserted. And that shows him taking base metal and turning it into something interesting. And then line 6 has to be under 8 words, and so I wrote, I never told another soul. That's interesting because we had a really long sentence, now we have a really short one, and the juxtaposition should be packed with meaning because, of course, I never told anyone that I saw my father turn into the god Thor. That would be kind of weird. But in my imagination, he was. Number 7, line 7, you have to name a piece of clothing. And I remembered a time when he was welding and little bits of steel burned through his boot and got onto his foot. So I thought this would be very visual because it creates an image in the mind of the reader and therefore makes my dad take on a more solid impression even though the reader never met him. Sometimes I wrote, the hot bits of molten steel burned holes in your boots. Line 8. Is a wish. So a wish is a kind of longing that appeals to the emotion of the reader. Your wish can be anything you like it to be, and it will become the wish of the reader too, because they know people too. So it becomes a way for the reader to better understand your connection with the subject of the poem. And I wrote that I wish I could have asked him how he changed from lowly mortal into a maker of things. You know, what made him when he was a younger man want to fix things and make things versus just use them. Line number 9, I use an animal. I had a dog growing up. Animals are symbols of power and intelligence. I chose a dog because I had a dog growing up. No dog could have served at your side with more love than me, and that was true. I used to hang with my dad all the time. Sometimes we didn't talk for hours. Line number 10 is alliteration. There's a video you can watch in the classroom, and you should. Alliteration is the repetition of consonant sounds, and consonants are any of our letters in our alphabet except the vowels, A, E, I, O, and U. And we do this to emphasize the sound of the poem. The repetition is a big tool that poets and songwriters used. So you repeat any sound by using words that contain those sounds. I chose L when I wrote, longingly I listened to the loud beat of your hammer. Then there's line 11. We have to use 2 commas, which usually just separates something, as you well know in your comma work this year. And I just chose that comma, which is a pause, to emphasize silence. And I wrote, but silence, quiet, and still is all I hear. So I had items in a list, and I used the Oxford comma before and. Line 12 is a smell and a color in the same sentence, and I wrote, after a thunderstorm I can smell the same red-hot iron odor. Smell is the sense most closely linked to memory, and color are some of the strongest symbols we have. So just think about, a color and a smell together. It's an interesting blend of imagery because it's using 2 different senses at once. Line 13 is another simile. And again, if you don't know what a simile is, there's a video on the classroom for you to watch. But a simile, something you learned probably in 3rd or 4th grade, is a comparison using like or as. You've used one before in line 4. So I'm comparing my dad to something else. But I didn't compare him this time. I just said I was linking to the line before when I said he smelled like a thunderstorm with red-hot iron odor. And I said, like the world has been welded together again and fixed in a factory. That smell that would be there, and the world being a factory. Line 14 is one with an exclamation point at the end, so it's an emotional statement. Any emotion counts really here. Happiness, joy, longing, sadness, you name it, you use it. And I wrote, great makings often break from overuse. And I meant that, like if you use something too much, it's going to break. And my father didn't live until I was an adult. I was 26, I was an adult. But my point is that, he worked so hard, I think it ended his life early. So I wrote that. And then line 15, was the last thing the reader's going to read, so I referred to the title of my poem, which was my father. So I wrote, "My father, the maker of things, so too with you," meaning that he broke from overuse too. And therefore, the last thing you write is the first thing the reader experiences and takes with them. And they remember that. They remember the last thing you write. They don't really remember the first thing you write. In my mind, I just let my father fill my mind, and I grabbed one idea about him at a time. The fact that he was a maker just stood out to me, and I didn't think about it really hard. We can overthink poetry. So you have to do this with someone you know. You don't have to explain like I did in red text, but I put my red text here for you to refer to in case you're wondering what to do. So if you don't know what alliteration or similes are, watch the videos and then choose carefully, because if you choose the right person or pet, you can choose a wonderful person or pet and then have this great memory that's on paper and will evoke all kinds of thoughts and emotions. Thank you. Good luck with this. These often are some of the best things kids write in their 7th grade year.